la 10.100.
The 10,196th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is identical letters dated 19 January 2026 from the permanent representative of Colombia to the United Nations addressed to the Secretary General and the President of the Security Council, S/2016/53. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Mr. Miroslav Jenča, Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Verification Mission in Colombia, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to the report of the Secretary General on the United Nations Verification Mission in Colombia in document S/2026/528. I now give the floor to Mr. Miroslav Jenča.
Mr. President, I am honored to brief the Security Council once again on Colombia's peace process and the work of the verification mission. It is a pleasure to be here today with Leonor Salabata, the permanent representative of Colombia to the United Nations. The cooperation the verification mission has enjoyed since its very establishment from the successive governments in Colombia has been essential to enabling it to perform the role mandated by this Council to advance peace and security in the country. We meet today just weeks after the conclusion of presidential elections and less than a month from the inauguration of President-elect Abelardo de la Espriella. Before turning to the peace process, I wish to acknowledge the significance of the democratic exercise just concluded by the Colombian people and the independent institutions responsible for the electoral process. Despite acts of violence and tensions in the run-up to the voting, it was gratifying for the verification mission to participate in various mechanisms that kept vigilance over the security environment for the carrying out of the elections. Through both rounds of the election, voting was conducted in a peaceful and orderly fashion. Security forces were deployed effectively to protect the process, and national and international election observers provided independent oversight. The high voter turnout on 21st June is a sign of the strong desire of Colombians to make their voices heard within a vibrant democracy that has become more inclusive and participatory in the framework of the peace process. The incoming administration is now preparing to assume the responsibilities of government. This will be the third administration elected since the signing of the peace agreement of 2016 to inherit both the responsibility for its implementation and the opportunity that this represents. While much work is still needed to fully realize its aims, the agreement has laid essential groundwork for establishing lasting peace and security. Its continued, even accelerated implementation remains fundamental for Colombia's present and its future. Drawing on nearly a decade of experience and its presence on the ground in areas still affected by conflict, the verification mission stands ready to engage with the new authorities, to listen to their priorities, to review with them the state of the agreement, and share views on its implementation, as well as to continue under its mandate with full respect of Colombian sovereignty to accompany national efforts to build peace and strengthen security. Part of building peace in a society fractured by conflicts is adopting a spirit of tolerance and coexistence that recognizes political differences as legitimate and favors dialogue. Unfortunately, the days since the election have been marked by continued heated rhetoric and political confrontation, causing even the suspension last week in the customary handover process, or empalme in Spanish, for exchanging information between the outgoing and incoming teams. In this context, I reiterate the call by the Secretary General in his report for Colombians, and particularly their political leaders, to act with responsibility in this period to reduce tensions after such a polarizing election. Maintaining respectful channels of communication is essential. The Congress, which will begin a new four-year period on 20 July, can play an important role in enabling cross-party dialogue, where different opinions can be reflected, issues debated, and problems resolved. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, security was among the chief concerns of the Colombian electorate. There was intense debate about the impact of recent peacemaking initiatives with armed groups, given limited results and concerns that the groups took advantage to further expand their reach, thereby worsening the security situation in various regions. Appropriate lessons should be drawn and applied in the future. At the same time, as Secretary General states in the latest report, it is important to remember that the security challenges in the regions still affected by conflict have deep and multifaceted roots. Overcoming them will require holistic solutions that are precisely those called for under the peace agreement of 2016. As the Secretary General has also emphasized, complementarity can be achieved between security actions focused on the protection of vulnerable communities, strengthened presence of state institutions, and peace-building policies. The ongoing violence between armed groups and criminal organizations for control over strategic routes and illicit economies is enabled by long-standing security, governance, and development vacuums that must be overcome for lasting stabilization of these areas. The areas where violence is most acute today are precisely those where implementation of the agreement and presence of state institutions has been insufficient. Conflict-affected regions, such as Catatumbo and Cauca, where the mission is present on the ground and able to help provide a bridge between local actors and authorities, are cases in point. Not only have they suffered for decades the consequences of war and the lack of a comprehensive state presence, but these conditions have also worsened over the past few years. The dire situation in Catatumbo was described to me recently in a meeting of local ombudspersons. Although special development plans for Catatumbo were announced after an upsurge in violence last year, conflict among armed groups has continued and intensified with changing methods of warfare, such as the use of drones. Breaking these recurrent cycles of violence requires that the central government fulfills the promises it makes of increased attention and better coordinated responses to meet the needs of these regions. We denounce the armed groups' continued threats and violence against civilians, the recruitment and use of children, kidnapping of persons, and other actions that have led to confinement and displacement. A new incident was reported last week in Lopez de Micay, in Cauca. We join in the call of the Ombudsman for the release of 8 persons who remain detained, allegedly by an armed group after an incursion that forced 70 families to flee their community. The mission stands ready to continue to facilitate the release of persons held against their will in Colombia. Mr. President, it is vitally important to ensure the physical security and the judicial guarantees afforded to the former FARC-EP leaders and combatants who disarmed under the agreement. More than 11,000 of them are still actively engaged in the reintegration process. The vast majority of those who lay down their arms. This is one of the examples globally where recidivism has been the lowest. Providing security guarantees and sustainable economic opportunities is essential to achieve 3 key goals within any reintegration process. First, to mitigate attempts at recruitment by armed groups. Second, to enable former combatants to consolidate their place as citizens. And third, to prevent the resurgence of violence. The leadership of the former FARC-EP has been clear in reaffirming publicly and within the former combatant population their commitment to keep abiding by the peace agreement. In recent days, with a view to the transition in administrations, they and other constituencies affiliated with the peace agreement have issued clear appeals for a recentering of peace-building efforts going forward on the further implementation of the peace agreement. Diverse organizations of civil society, including victims, Afro-Colombian and indigenous groups, are urging this renewed focus on the peace accord. Mr. President, the comprehensive rural reform of the peace agreement can be a key ingredient to stabilizing conflict-affected areas. It can create viable alternatives to illicit activities and help to unlock the economic potential of these rural regions. An example of progress under the auspices of the agreement that should be strengthened in the period ahead are the investments made under the development programs within a territorial focus, PEDETS in Spanish acronym, in 170 conflict-affected municipalities, home to close to 6 million people. Recognizing that the transformation of these territories requires time, political forces in Congress, otherwise opposed on many issues, recently agreed to extend the timeline for the implementation of the PEDET to 2037. The demands of the communities should be addressed through these projects. Focused progress in the next few years, which the mission can continue to monitor, would cement the conditions for sustainable results over the long term. Progress has also been made in providing land to landless farmers, victims, rural women, and indigenous peoples. However, much remains to be done. For example, in providing formal titles, technical and financial support, enabling the land to be productive. The physical security of some of the new owners remains a serious concern. The mission has observed serious incidents of intimidation aimed at driving them out. In the department of Meta, a family was recently assaulted and tortured by armed men. Such acts of violence must cease. Strengthening security for beneficiaries and resolving long-standing tenure disputes through legal and institutional channels will be key to preventing old conflict dynamics from re-emerging and to sustaining confidence in the peace process. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, Colombia, despite the serious challenges it still faces, has moved forward since the most difficult times of its armed conflict. It is crucial to protect what progress has been made, to expand security and development through enhanced state presence in the regions still heavily affected by conflict, and to ensure justice is delivered under the terms of the agreement for those who suffered the most. As a new political chapter begins, another milestone will come later this year when the peace agreement reaches the 10-year mark, 2/3 of the way along a formal 15-year timetable that was set by the peace agreement itself. This remaining time frame provides a useful horizon to work to accelerate and consolidate progress in aspects that have already advanced considerably over the years and which remain important for lasting peace and security for the Colombian people. The Security Council has been a constant source of support and encouragement for the country to persist on the path to peace and prosperity for the Colombian people, and I am sure this will remain the case. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie
I thank Mr. Yencha for his briefing. I now give the floor to those members of the Council that wish to make a statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I also thank Special Representative Yencha for his briefing. First, I would like to congratulate Colombia on the recent presidential elections. I want to congratulate all of those involved, including the electoral authorities, the security forces, but above all, the Colombian people, on a peaceful and transparent democratic process. This Council and the UN verification mission have engaged effectively with successive Colombian governments, and we look forward to working closely with President-elect de la Espriella and his team when they take office on the 7th of August. President, the United Kingdom reaffirms its full commitment to the implementation of the 2016 peace agreement. This year marks the 10th anniversary of the agreement, a landmark achievement which has delivered significant results towards lasting peace and stability for the Colombian people. and we welcome the recent progress on rural reform and reintegration of former combatants. However, as the Secretary General's report sets out, Colombia continues to face significant security challenges. Armed groups are committing serious human rights abuses and driving criminality. Signatories of the 2016 peace agreements, human rights defenders, and community leaders continue to be killed and harassed. Cultivation of coca, production of cocaine, illegal mining, and environmental degradation have also grown in recent years. We look forward to working with Colombia's new government to tackle these shared security challenges. Implementing the 2016 peace agreement remains central to these efforts as part of a comprehensive and sustainable approach to delivering peace, security, and stabilization in Colombia. Rural reform, political participation, reintegration, countering illicit drugs, and responding to the needs of victims must remain a key focus for implementation, particularly in Colombia's rural and conflict-affected communities, to ensure all Colombians can benefit from peace. President, over the past decade, the UN verification mission has been an essential mechanism for the international community to support the implementation of the 2016 agreement and to honor its commitment to the Colombian people. The UK remains committed to these efforts and to supporting Colombia on its path towards lasting peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie la
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom. I give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Special Representative Miroslav Jenča for his comprehensive briefing. And at the outset, I would like to commend the Colombian authorities for carrying out a peaceful, democratic, and orderly electoral process. And we congratulate all Colombians for their record high participation in the second round vote on the 31st of May. Now that the elections have successfully concluded, we encourage a smooth transition and constructive dialogue between the outgoing and incoming administrations to overcome polarization. We trust that the new administration will pursue inclusive and representative governance that reflects the aspirations of all Colombians. Mr. President, this year will mark 10 years since the signing of the 2016 peace agreement. Over the past decade, and under 3 successive governments, its implementation has delivered measurable progress for the Colombian people. The agreement remains firmly embedded in Colombia's constitutional framework and continues to be the only comprehensive framework for achieving lasting peace. The peace agreement has enabled Colombia to enjoy its most sustained period of peace in decades. It has tackled the origins of the conflict, promoted reconciliation, and created opportunities for communities affected by violence. These achievements must be preserved, protected, and built upon through the continued implementation of the agreements. We encourage the incoming administration to continue its close cooperation with the UN, particularly the UN verification mission in Colombia, recognizing that this partnership and engagement with the international community remain essential for the consolidation of sustainable peace through the architecture of the 2016 peace agreements. President, we welcome the progress achieved during the reporting period in implementing rural reform and reintegration. The reduction in rural poverty and growing number of cooperatives established by former combatants demonstrate the tangible benefits of sustained implementation. However, serious challenges remain and need continued commitment and solutions. We're deeply concerned by the expanding presence of illegal armed groups and the violence they continue to inflict on social leaders, former combatants, women, indigenous peoples, and communities of African descent, who continue to be disproportionately affected by violence, displacement, and other human rights violations. And we underscore the need to strengthen the protection of these communities. We're equally alarmed by the large number of Colombians subjected to forced home confinement as a result of illegal armed group control in conflict-affected departments of the country. Freedom of movement is fundamental human right, and Colombia must ensure that all its citizens can exercise it safely. And we encourage the Colombian authorities to intensify their efforts to continue addressing the origins of the conflict, including illicit economies, and strengthen the state's presence in conflict-affected territories for the security, safety, and well-being of the Colombian people. Mr. President, we underscore the continued importance of advancing gender equality, of women, peace and security agenda, and diversity and inclusion across all levels of Colombian society. As Colombia enters a new chapter, preserving gains achieved under the peace agreement must include continued protection of indigenous peoples and communities of African descent, whose rights, participation, and security remain indispensable to sustainable and inclusive peace. Finally, we affirm our full support for the UN verification mission in Colombia. The trust it has earned among Colombians, particularly in remote and conflict-affected areas, remains one of its greatest strengths. And we are confident that the mission, in close cooperation with the new Colombian government, will continue to play a vital role in supporting the implementation of the peace agreement and accompanying Colombia on its path towards lasting peace. I thank you.
Je remercie la représentante.
I thank the representative of Latvia for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we thank Miroslav Yencha for his detailed briefing on the situation in Colombia. The country has held another presidential election, and it is important now to ensure that there's a calm and unimpeded transfer of power. On election day, polling stations were open even in the most remote regions, and there a record number of voters cast their ballots safely. And this was made possible to a large extent by the signing in 2016 of the final peace agreement. Its significance and future fate are precisely what we would like to focus on today during this transitional period for Colombia. The agreements reached not only brought the long-awaited end to a half-century internal armed conflict, but also defined the course and values of the entire process of national reconciliation. The search for truth, dialogue, and acceptance of responsibility became the principles on which the system of transitional justice, reparations for victims, and reintegration of former FARC members into civilian life was painstakingly built. Should be emphasized that the maximum positive effect from the implementation of the agreement is achieved only when its provisions are implemented comprehensively, as they are enshrined in the country's constitution and in the relevant resolutions of the UN Security Council. For example, the transfer of land to peasants and victims of the conflict makes no sense if the transferred property is not protected from attempts at it by armed groups. Similarly, the full reintegration of former combatants is impossible without providing them with real security guarantees. Unfortunately, during the years the agreement has been in force, we have repeatedly observed how the Colombian authorities, whether to suit their own preference or simply because their capacity was limited, sought to implement only those provisions of the agreement which were of interest and benefit to them, and setting aside others. But the final peace agreement is not an a la carte menu. It is a legally binding commitment whose comprehensive implementation is monitored by the international community. And in this context, we note the unwavering commitment to the agreement on the part of its signatories from the former FARC, whose leadership recently invited the president-elect to engage in dialogue and jointly seek ways to implement the agreement. The fact that 11,000 former combatants continue to participate in the process and build peaceful lives is in itself a great achievement. The authorities in Bogota simply must not betray their trust, and we never tire of repeating that it's critically important to ensure the security of former combatants and end impunity for acts of violence against them, as well as against the country's social and ethnic leaders. The legal pillar of the agreement and the guarantee of non-recurrence of the conflict is a national transitional justice system whose independent work we fully support. We note the issuance by the Special Jurisdiction for Peace of final decisions in a number of cases and expect that the former FARC leaders and former military personnel found most responsible for crimes will soon be able to begin serving them out their sentences. We also hope that acceptable arrangements for international accompanied of this process can be consolidated. The great threat to Colombia's security now comes from armed groups that remain outside the peace process. Attempts by the outgoing administration to bring them to the negotiating table have unfortunately not produced sustainable results. Nonetheless, we call on President-elect Abelardo de la Espriella to take a balanced approach to the problem of the illegal armed groups operating in the country and to continue seeking avenues for dialogue. Any possible security measures should be complemented by a package of socioeconomic instruments and by the gradual strengthening of long-term state presence in conflict-affected regions. And finally, any initiatives regarding active armed groups should be coordinated with a policy of implementing the final peace agreement and should not hinder the implementation of the agreement. Mr. President, whatever difficulties and setbacks may have accompanied the process of implementing the final agreement over the years, its enormous positive impact on overall security and national reconciliation in the country is undeniable. What has been lacking and what Colombia so needs now is a unified and comprehensive strategy for implementing the agreements. We expect real and effective measures in this direction from the future Colombian authorities. And concrete assistance to Bogota on behalf of the international community can always be provided by the UN verification mission, which possesses unique expertise and a broad presence on the ground. Russia, as a permanent member of the Security Council, will continue to provide maximum support to the Colombian peace process in order to make it sustainable and irreversible. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to Special Representative Yencha for your presentation. The United States congratulates the Colombian people and authorities for holding peaceful and democratic presidential elections. We note the record voter turnout in the June 21 second round, with 63% of the eligible 41 million voters casting their ballots and no polling stations requiring relocation due to security concerns. We applaud the UN verification mission's contributions to election security. The United States also congratulates President-elect Abelardo de la Espriella on his victory. We look forward to working with him and his team to advance our shared priorities, including supporting national efforts to advance peace and security for all Colombians. While Election Day was peaceful, we acknowledge the concerns about political violence and threats throughout the electoral cycle, including the assassination of Senator Uribe. The United States strongly reiterates its position that there is no place for political violence or meddling with the democratically expressed will of the Colombian people. Any threats to impede the democratic process and peaceful, timely, and smooth transition of power are unacceptable. The United States remains deeply concerned about instability, violence, and illegal drug cultivation and production in Colombia. The violence and drug trafficking perpetrated by terrorist organizations and illegal armed groups threaten the safety of Colombians, of the broader region, and of Americans. From April 24th to April 26th, shortly after the last briefing to the Council on Colombia, FARC dissident terrorists unleashed a wave of violence against civilians using improvised explosive devices, vehicle-borne explosives, and attack drones, leaving at least 21 dead. We reiterate Special Representative Yencha's condemnation of the attack. Eradicating coca cultivation and cocaine production is essential to preventing illegal armed groups from terrorizing Colombia and the region. The United States condemns all those who undermine peace through narco-trafficking and terrorism and looks forward to close cooperation with the De La Espriella government on these priorities. We continue to note the tragic and wide-ranging impacts of the expanding presence of armed groups and illicit economies, including intensified violence, forced confinement, mass displacement, and the forced recruitment of children in conflict. Colombia's deteriorating security crisis is a worrying humanitarian situation. Establishing the conditions for long-term security will require Colombia to dedicate resources to establishing state presence in conflict zones, including police, prosecutors, and judges, as well as infrastructure and access to markets for legitimate economic opportunities. The United States is committed to peace and justice in Colombia, and our relationship with the Colombian people and their institutions is strong and enduring. We continue to urge the government of Colombia to prioritize comprehensive and expeditious implementation of its commitments under the peace accord, especially those related to security and infrastructure investment, as part of the permanent solution to Colombian narcoterrorism and insecurity. I thank you.
Je remercie le...
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Bahrain.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. أود
Thank you, Mr. President. Please allow me to, first of all, thank the Secretary General for his report on the situation in Colombia. I also would like to thank Mr. Miroslav Jenča, Special Representative of the Secretary General for Colombia and head of the United Nations Verification Mission in Colombia. I thank him for his briefing and for the active role he's playing. The Kingdom of Bahrain welcomes the Secretary General's report, which contains the progress made in the implementation of the 2016 peace agreement, and stress the importance of continued efforts in the area of transitional justice, rural development, and to continue investments in sustainable development that contributes to security, stability, and prosperity in Colombia. Mr. President, we congratulate Colombia on successful elections, presidential elections in Colombia, and they reflect the commitment of Colombian people to the democratic process and constitutional institutions. Mr. President, several reports indicate the continuous security challenges in several regions and acts of violence by armed groups, and the consequences of that in terms of loss of civilian life and population displacement and humanitarian consequences, increasing consequences they have, including the recruitment of children and the spread of illicit economic activities. The Kingdom of Bahrain would like to stress that the full and balanced implementation of the peace agreement remains the main pillar for the consolidation of security and stability in Colombia. That the implementation of rural reform programs needs to continue, as well as the promotion of development and economic programs in affected areas. Also, there needs to be ensuring of sustainable integration of ex-combatants in the way that contributes to addressing the root causes of the conflict and preventing the recurrence of violence. We also commend and underscore the decisive role played by the United Nations Verification Mission in following up on the implementation of the final peace agreement, in monitoring progress in rural areas, the development of infrastructure, and close coordination between national authorities and international partners. This helps build confidence in the comprehensive implementation of the agreement. In conclusion, the Kingdom of Bahrain reiterates its support for the unity and sovereignty of Colombia and stresses that the Security Council, the international community needs to support national efforts to ensure comprehensive and sustainable peace in order to achieve security and prosperity for the Colombian people. I thank you. I thank the representative of Bahrain for this statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Mr. President, I would also like to thank Special Representative Miroslav Jenča for his briefing. Colombia stands at an important political moment. Having concluded its presidential elections, a smooth and cooperative transition to the new administration is essential in order to preserve the progress achieved under the final peace agreement and ensure continuity in the implementation of its commitments. I would like to make the following 3 points today. First, Greece commends the Colombian people and the Colombian authorities for the peaceful and well-run presidential elections process and for the strong voter participation. Second, nearly a decade after the final peace agreement, we welcome the gradual progress achieved in its implementation, in particular regarding comprehensive rural reform and the reintegration of ex-combatants. We stress the need for it to be carried through fully and consistently. These two elements of the peace agreement remain central to fostering economic growth, strengthening social cohesion, stabilizing conflict-affected areas, and consolidating lasting peace and security. This must apply evenly across all territories to avoid inequalities. Third, the security situation in areas under the control of armed groups remains deeply concerning. Intensified by the use of explosive weapons and drones, the violence perpetrated by armed groups continues to affect civilians, resulting in killings, humanitarian crisis, and displacement. While we commend Colombia for its efforts to address violations against children, the persistent high number of grave violations committed against children by armed groups, particularly their recruitment and use, including through social media, remains alarming. Equally troubling is the exposure of women and girls to conflict-related sexual violence in these areas. Greece condemns the violence carried out by armed groups and calls for the immediate end to their illicit activities. We will continue to support the government's efforts to build on existing achievements and implement the peace agreement. Mr. President, in closing, Greece renews its strong support for the SRSG and the United Nations Verification Mission in Colombia in their efforts to contribute to lasting peace and security. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Colombia, Miroslav Yencha, for his detailed briefing and for his obvious efforts to fully fulfill the important mandate entrusted to him. It is a responsibility that certainly could not be in better hands. First of all, as a nation with a firm democratic conviction, we would like to congratulate the kindred Colombian people for the historic levels of turnout seen in the recent presidential elections. This is a demonstration of Colombian society's commitment to democratic values and to the civic dynamism that characterized this election process. We extend these congratulations to the president-elect, Abelardo de la Espriella, with whom our president has already had a conversation on matters of strategic interest for both countries. On that basis, we hope to continue strengthening bilateral cooperation for the benefit of our neighboring nations. In this context of transition, we trust that the presidential handover will take place in an orderly and cooperative way to keep moving forward with building a consensus for the sake of the Colombian people. President, returning to the subject before us today, Panama reiterates its support for the United Nations Verification Mission in Colombia and highlights the importance of ensuring the continuity of its work, especially because of its presence, its proximity to and direct knowledge of the realities in the communities and territories that are most affected by the conflict. From a pragmatic point of view, it is an indisputable fact that the final agreement dismantled the biggest armed group in Colombia, and faced with this reality for Panama as a matter of national security, it is essential that there continue to be international follow-up that with security assurances and appropriate job opportunities, addresses the more than 11,000 former combatants who decided to lay down their weapons and choose peace. Otherwise, a security outlook that has already suffered significant setbacks since the crisis in Catatumbo, in a context of growing clashes between armed groups and organized crime, could deteriorate even further. And it is precisely because of this situation in the Sisterly Republic of Colombia that Panama reaffirms that the comprehensive implementation of the agreement supports security efforts and remains an important component in addressing the structural causes of violence. Comprehensive state presence and paying priority attention to territories and populations that have historically and disproportionately been affected by the conflict, among other provisions of the agreement, have proven to be fundamental on Colombia's path towards a lasting peace. Panama recognizes the achievements made in this area since the previous report, in the areas of comprehensive rural reform, land delivery and formalization, the implementation of development programs with a territorial focus, the PDETs, and the reincorporation of former combatants. Regarding transitional justice, Panama takes note of the recent firm sentences issued by the Special Jurisdiction for Peace in Case 01 on abductions and in Case 03 on extrajudicial executions. The concept that transitional justice is rooted in and of itself innovative, has possibly been affected because the complexity that is inherent to its implementation made it harder for the results to be achieved and for them to be perceived and seen as quickly as public opinion expected. Moreover, we commend the continuation of international monitoring of the sentences of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, and we welcome the involvement of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and of the mission to support the peace process of the Organization of American States in this mechanism. President, although there are still challenges, the consequences of which remain tangible for thousands of Colombians, the progress that has been made in the implementation of the final peace agreement shows that it is possible to keep moving forward. We are certain that Colombia, led by its new administration, will continue to redouble its efforts and, to that end, will have the accompaniment of this Council and of Panama as its neighbor to build peace. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Panama for this statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of China.
President, I thank Special Representative Yencha for his briefing. China congratulates Colombia on a smooth presidential election, which coincides with the 10th anniversary of the peace agreement. Thanks to years of sustained efforts by all parties in Colombia, the peace process has made positive progress. China looks forward to a smooth transition of government in Colombia and calls on all relevant parties to demonstrate greater political will and ability to act to ensure steady and sustained progress in the peace process. Let me make 4 points. First, safeguarding the achievements of peace and advancing the implementation of the agreement. The peace agreement offers an effective pathway to lasting peace in Colombia and should be implemented in a comprehensive and balanced manner. China supports the new Colombian government in making the implementation of the peace agreement a policy priority. Building on existing achievements, the government should increase resource allocation and strengthen coordination to secure new substantive progress in areas such as comprehensive rural reform and DDR. The Commission for the Follow-up, Promotion and Verification of the Implementation of the Final Agreement provides a vital platform for consultation among all parties, and China welcomes the extension of its mandate. The Special Jurisdiction for Peace, as a crucial component of the agreement, has effectively promoted fairness, justice, and national reconciliation, and should continue to operate effectively. Second, consolidating security gains and strengthening the protection of civilians. Former combatants and grassroots communities continue to face threats of violence. China supports the Colombian government in strengthening state control extending effective state authority to remote conflict-affected areas, establishing a strong deterrent against violence, and effectively ensuring the safety and security of vulnerable groups such as former combatants, ethnic minorities, women, and children. We support the Colombian government in maintaining contact and engaging in peace talks with armed groups to keep seeking progress. Third, unlocking development dividends and eradicating the breeding ground for conflict. Inadequate development is a major driver of recurring conflict. China welcomes the positive progress Colombia has made in land tenure regularization and the significant reduction in rural poverty. We hope the new government will continue to increase investment in development, accelerate land adjudication and formalization, strengthen rural infrastructure, and create more educational and employment opportunities for farmers, thereby benefiting more people at the grassroots level. In areas such as land allocation, housing development, vocational training, and productivity, systematic support is needed for former combatants to reintegrate into society with dignity. Fourth, building international consensus and providing strong support. Colombia's peace process relies on the continued attention and support of the international community. China appreciates the important role played by the UN verification mission in Colombia and the SRSG, and supports the mission in continuing to effectively discharge its mandate. The international community should respect Colombia's leadership of the peace process and provide further constructive assistance based on Colombia's own needs and priorities. Efforts should be made to better coordinate development assistance with peace building, directing more funds and projects towards areas severely affected by conflict to create synergy in support of the peace process. President, the peace process in Colombia stands as a success story of resolving conflict through dialogue and consultation. China is willing to work with the Colombian government and all other parties to continuously advance a peace process that is Colombian-led and Colombia-owned, and to contribute positively to the realization of comprehensive peace, stability, and development in Colombia. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to, first of all, thank the special representative, Mr. Miroslav Yencha. I thank him for his briefing and for the action that's being done by the mission. You have all of our support. Mr. President, the elections that just completed in Colombia is a testament to the strength of the country's democratic institutions. Presidential and legislative elections were generally peaceful, and the Colombian people have expressed themselves peacefully, freely, and they made their choice. It is now necessary to overcome political divisions and ensure that there's a peaceful transition of power. The challenges to consolidating peace and security in Colombia remain numerous nonetheless. The deterioration of the security situation in some regions because of an upsurge in the activity of armed groups, despite the offers of peace made to them, is the obvious expression of this. And these groups, which profit from drug trafficking and illegal gold panning, continue to carry out abuses against civilian population. Children, whose recruitment continues, are the main victims of this. We condemn this and call for this violence to stop. Mr. President, it's been almost 10 years since the Colombian peace agreement was signed and endorsed by this Council, which has given its full support to its implementation by creating a special political mission to accompany Colombians in this process. The mandate of the United Nations verification mission was renewed and adapted last October. It is important that dialogue be established now between the mission and the incoming Colombian authorities in order to determine the conditions under which the continuation of this cooperation, which we are very much calling for, can be achieved for the benefit of peace and security in Colombia. Let's recall in this regard that the substantial investment made by the international community over the past decade has been motivated by the observation that the peace agreement constitutes a precise and comprehensive roadmap to address the structural factors that fuel instability in the country, and to do this along the following main axes. First, to strengthen the presence of state throughout the territory, and to reduce territorial inequalities, which are the breeding ground for violence, and to do this through rural reform. In this regard, I would like to recall the commitment of France. We are an accompanying country under Chapter 1 of the agreement since 2016 with a technical and financial cooperation component. Second, to fight against trafficking by offering alternatives to illicit production. Third, to work towards the reintegration of 11,000 former combatants who otherwise would be likely to take up their arms again. And several around this table underscore the importance of this. Fourth, to provide security guarantees to protect the most vulnerable strata of the population. And five, to promote national reconciliation through transitional justice, whose recent sentences are to be welcomed. This is a long inheritance, these 10 years. It has to be maintained and to make sure that is finalized and carried out. Mr. President, the peace agreement has proved its worth. It has made it possible to put an end to several decades of armed conflict and carries within it the promise of a lasting peace, so difficultly arrived at. The fulfillment of this promise depends on the full implementation of the agreement as provided for in the Colombian constitution. France will continue to work to ensure that this council continues to support the Colombian people's aspirations for peace and prosperity with the respect for Colombian sovereignty. I thank you. I thank the representative of France for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I also would like to thank Special Representative Janša for his briefing, and as well begin by congratulating the Colombian people for carrying out well-conducted elections in June. A true commitment to democracy was demonstrated by the record high voter participation and the peaceful conduct of the polls. We further commend the outgoing Colombian administration on their efforts to advance the peace process. Great strides were made, but more work lies ahead. A cooperative transition to preserve the progress made under the peace agreement is crucial. We urge leaders to work across the political divides, avoid confrontational rhetoric, and maintain constructive channels of dialogue. Mr. President, dedicated implementation of the peace agreement remains the only way to bring about sustainable peace across Colombia. We welcome progress made, particularly on comprehensive rural reform to address structural problems and advance security in rural areas. Expanding access to land, fostering economic growth, and extending state presence and public services will be essential to stabilize conflict-affected regions. We call for continued progress on land delivery and formalization and the effective, well-coordinated implementation of national plans on rural reforms. Mr. President, addressing persistent violence and insecurity in conflict-affected areas remain an urgent priority. Armed groups competing for control of territory and illicit economies has led to violence and generated humanitarian crises across multiple rural departments. We remain gravely concerned by the high levels of violence against social leaders and human rights defenders, mostly women, Afro-Colombian people, and indigenous peoples. Security guarantees must also be ensured for the more than 11,000 former combatants who laid down their arms. The heightened violence in the southwestern region in recent weeks is deeply alarming. We condemn in the strongest terms the attack against civilians by the EMC on 25th April in Cauca, where an explosive device hit a passenger bus and other civilian vehicles. We further deplore the grave violations against children in Colombia. More must be done to ensure the protection of children, prevent their recruitment into armed groups. We also call for continued implementation of the Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security to address the worrying reports of conflict-related sexual violence. Enhanced implementation of the peace agreement, including its gender-related provisions, will address much of the underlying causes of this violence, helping to fill security, governance, and development vacuums across the country. We also express our full support for the Special Jurisdiction for Peace and call for accelerated efforts to deliver transitional justice and redress for the victims. In closing, Mr. President, I want to reaffirm Denmark's steadfast support to the people and the peace process in Colombia. We remain committed to working with Colombia as it continues on its path towards lasting and sustainable peace. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank SRSG Yencha for his comprehensive briefing and extend our support for the UN verification mission's efforts in the implementation of the final peace agreement. We commend Colombia, its people, and all stakeholders for the smooth and peaceful conduct of presidential elections and wish to extend our felicitation to the incoming administration on the electoral victory. Pakistan's support for the Colombian-led 2016 peace agreement remains steadfast. We applaud the present government for the progress made in the implementation of this agreement despite challenges. We hope that this positive trajectory in the pursuit of sustainable peace in the country and prosperity and well-being for all Colombian people would continue. President, we recognize the domestic complexities associated with the implementation of the peace plan and commend the continued dedication and commitment shown by all parties to the agreement. We support Colombia for the implementation of the 2016 peace plan in its entirety. A sustained, balanced, and inclusive approach aligned with the interests, first and foremost, of the Colombian people remains the key to achieving lasting peace. In this context, we take positive note of the progress made in rural reforms, steps for the reintegration of former combatants, and efforts to reinforce protection measures. Security has remained a perennial challenge and threatens to upend the gains made thus far. Continued violence and targeting of ex-combatants, social leaders, and human rights defenders by armed groups is condemnable. We also condemn attacks by armed groups targeting state security forces and urge all armed actors to renounce violence and fully respect Colombia's national laws. In this context, we support all efforts by the Colombian government to strengthen security. The 2016 final peace agreement set Colombia on a path towards lasting peace and prosperity. Pakistan remains committed to supporting the Colombian people for the realization of this vision of peace. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
Su Excelencia.
Your Excellency, Zenon Congo Ngai, Permanent Representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo to the United Nations. Mr. Miroslav Yencha, Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Verification Mission in Colombia. Your Excellencies, Permanent Representatives on the Security Council, distinguished participants, I am addressing you on the occasion of the last quarterly briefing on Colombia in which the government of President Gustavo Petro will participate. In a few weeks' time, this government will conclude its term, but the commitment of the Colombian state to the 2016 final peace agreement will not come to an end. For 10 years, this council has supported Colombia with a commitment that has not merely been pro forma, it has been substantive. Your support has left a fundamental lesson for all peace processes, and that is that the sustainability of peace does not solely depend on the will of a government. It also depends on the existence of institutions, norms, international guarantees that are able to protect the progress that has been made from political changes. It is precisely that architecture of peace that this government has sought to strengthen. And it is that same architecture which today we call upon this council to continue protecting. And that is perhaps the most important message that Colombia can bring before this council today. A country that 10 years ago negotiated the end of a war is today capable of consolidating its democracy through free and peaceful elections. That reality is also one of the most significant consequences of the 2016 final agreement. Mr. President, Colombia would like to express its gratitude to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, for his leadership and his commitment to Colombia's peace, to his special representative and head of the verification mission, Miroslav Yencha, and to the verification mission's team, whose accompaniment has been essential during this process. We also wish to thank the members of this council, especially the United Kingdom in its capacity as penholder, for your leadership in building consensus and your sustained support for Colombia for almost a decade. We also recognize the contribution of the guarantor countries, the accompanying countries, the cooperating countries, and the donor countries that helped turn the commitments of the final agreement into actions with concrete results in the territories. And in particular, we express our gratitude to the signatories of the final agreement and to the various implementing bodies whose unfailing commitment has helped preserve the bilateral, participatory, and inclusive nature of the 2016 agreement. Mr. President, Colombia is grateful for the presentation of the Secretary General's report and takes due note of his observations and recommendations, which constitute a valuable input to guide the comprehensive implementation of the final agreement. We recognize that the report reflects significant progress and also challenges which require a sustained and coordinated response on the part of the state. These 4 years have reaffirmed that the implementation of the 2016 agreement is a long-term process, one that requires continuity and institutional commitment. Overcoming the structural causes of the conflict, inequality, exclusion, impunity, and mistrust is not the work merely of the government, it is a responsibility of state. This experience also reminds us that the progress that has been achieved coexists with challenges that cannot be ignored. Violence against those that have chosen peace remains a profound concern. Therefore, guaranteeing the safety and security of those that have laid down their weapons, of communities, and of those who are working to transform territories continues to be an urgent priority. These challenges do not take away from what has been achieved. On the contrary, they reiterate the importance of preserving the final agreement as a policy of state and of maintaining the efforts needed to complete its implementation. On this basis, allow me to present some of the main progress that has been achieved over the last 4 years. In the area of comprehensive rural reform, the most significant progress has been made since the final agreement was signed. 2.28 million hectares of land has been formalized via the delivery of nearly 41,000 rural property titles. 351,000 hectares have been allocated to peasant families and ethnic communities. 806,081 hectares have been incorporated into the land fund. 21 new peasant reserve zones have been created, bringing the total number to 28 and expanding their coverage to more than 1.3 million hectares. And the PDETs have been extended until 2037. The National Agrarian Reform System has been strengthened. The land rights of ethnic peoples have been recognized over 1.45 million hectares. In the area of reincorporation, More than 11,000 signatories continue to be in the process of reintegration, which is equivalent to more than 80% of those that signed the agreement in 2016. Access to land has gone from around 800 hectares allocated in up to 2022 to more than 20,000 during the last 4 years, strengthening the TATRs and productive projects. And currently, 21 TATRs have their own land, generating greater conditions of stability and sustainability. Progress has been made on the implementation of 1,584 housing solutions for signatories of the peace agreement. In the context of the Commission for Follow-up, Promotion and Verification of Implementation, the CSIVI, we have strengthened the main institutional space for dialogue, consultation, and follow-up to the final agreement, with the participation of bodies for women and ethnic peoples, thus preserving its bilateral and participatory nature. Moreover, the implementation framework plan has been updated. This is the roadmap for measuring the compliance with the agreement up to 2031, overcoming a 7-year delay via the adjustment of 123 indicators, the creation of 77 new ones, and the consolidation of 593 follow-up indicators. Mr. President, lastly, I would like to take this opportunity to refer to the fact that recently 99 men and women from the Coordinadora Nacional Ejército Bolivariano, CNEB, laid down their arms and began the process of transitioning to full citizenship through their movement towards the temporary location zone, the ZUT, in Valle del Guamuez in Putumayo, which has its own mechanism for monitoring and verification. This is a concrete and tangible demonstration of the achievements of the Gustavo Petro government's peace policy. These are 99 people who have opted for disarmament, have chosen peace and reconciliation in the midst of an uncertain political context. Therefore, interrupting the functioning of this would jeopardize what has been achieved in the process. It would jeopardize physical security and trust in the state and in the international community by a group of people that believed in this peace policy. Ensuring continuity, security guarantees, logistics, international support, and international sustainability is essential so that the CNEB can move towards verifiable commitments and allow Putumayo to consolidate its path towards peace. Mr. President, Colombia is concluding this cycle of government with the conviction that peace does not belong to one administration, nor to one specific political moment. It is a policy of state and a long-term commitment to those that have suffered most greatly from the consequences of the conflict. The progress that has been achieved, as well as the challenges that persist, remind us that our work is not over. The responsibility now is to protect what has been built, to accelerate what is still pending, and to make sure that future generations receive a country that has more democracy, more opportunities, and less violence. The sustained support of the entire international community shows that the implementation of the 2016 agreement is an example of the value of multilateralism and of international cooperation. Colombia will continue to work hand in hand with the United Nations and its partners to continue making progress with the comprehensive implementation of the 2016 peace agreement and to consolidate a stable and lasting peace for all Colombians. Thank you very much.
La représentante de la...
I thank the representative of Colombia for her statement. I will now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Honorable membre.
Distinguished members of the Council, colleagues, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3, namely Liberia, Somalia, and my own country, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Colombia, Mr. Miroslav Yencha. We thank him for his comprehensive briefing. The A3 reaffirm their support for the United Nations Verification Mission in Colombia and encourage the Council to maintain its focused engagement. We acknowledge Colombia's peaceful and orderly conduct of its presidential election. As the preparations for the new administration are underway in a polarized political context, a transition based on dialogue and cooperation will be essential to consolidate the gains achieved and address persistent challenges. The value of the final peace agreement lies in its continued implementation, particularly through reintegration, the strengthening of security guarantees, and comprehensive rule reform in full respect of Colombia's national ownership. Security and the implementation of the peace agreement must be mutually reinforcing. In this regard, the A3 wishes to highlight the following points. First, comprehensive rule reform and reintegration remain central to sustainable peace. We welcome continued progress in land delivery and formalization. However, progress remains uneven. We encourage continued efforts to operationalize the land measures to ensure legal certainty and deliver visible peace dividends in conflict-affected territories. We welcome the continued commitment of more than 11,000 former combatants to civilian life. Sustainable reintegration requires land, housing, livelihoods, and basic services. No former combatant who laid down arms should be left vulnerable to recruitment, insecurity, or renewed violence. Second, security guarantees must be fully implemented. The A3 remain concerned by persistent insecurity in conflict-affected regions, including competition amongst armed groups over territory, restrictions on movement, and the recruitment and use being made of children. We condemn attacks against civilians, including the deadly attacks in Cauca, and express our particular concern at the deaths of children, which was reported in Guaviare. We also remain concerned by the violence against former combatants, social leaders, including women leaders, and ethnic authorities. We encourage stronger use of existing mechanisms to prevent violence, investigate threats, and dismantle armed and criminal structures. Third, ethnic, gender, and institutional commitments must be preserved through the transition. Indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities continue to be disproportionately affected by displacement, confinement, land disputes, illegal mining, and control by armed group. Women leaders in conflict-affected areas also face specific threats, limited access to protection, and humanitarian needs. We note the changes surrounding the future of the Ministry of Equality and Equity and its possible implications for the gender provisions of the agreement and Colombia's National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. We also wish to emphasize that any reallocation of functions should preserve institutional continuity, ensure adequate resources, and enable the achievement of concrete, measurable results on the ground. Distinguished members of the Council, as Colombia moves toward the 10th anniversary of the final agreement, it can count on the steadfast and resolute support of the A3 for its government and its people. While the progress made since 2016 is undeniable, major challenges remain. At this pivotal moment, the Security Council must send an unequivocal message. The full implementation of the final agreement remains the surest path to consolidating lasting peace, strengthening national reconciliation, and meeting the aspirations of the Colombian people. The A3 reaffirmed their full commitment to supporting Colombia in this process until the peace objectives enshrined in the final agreement are achieved. I thank you.
I resume my functions as President of the Council. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.